Yep.
So good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good whatever time of day it is, wherever you are in the world. It's my pleasure today to introduce Steve Hansen. Again, like Yolanda, I've known Steve since about 2002, and he's done every single workshop I've ever taught. And he's one of these remarkable people who's been able to, who truly understands NK in depth and has always been able to tell me and show me new insights. For the last few years, he's been working in this immune clinic in San Diego and really extended the NK work and really extended it very well. And we've just had 2 of his workshops in Australia and everyone's very happy with it. It's very good. So Steve is going to talk about acquired immunity, which is going to be very interesting. And I hope you all enjoyed it. So it's over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Hugo. I appreciate that. It's been my pleasure and honor to go through all of Hugo's information that he's put out over the years, and it's so I'm glad to be here to talk about it to everyone. Okay, so it's immune season, even though it's summer, because it's immune season everywhere right now. So we'll talk a little bit about the immune system. So the immune system is amazing. It's like an adaptive computer. It can just on the fly create a successful, repeatable immune response to an invader, which is a lot. That's something that takes years for our medical science to do. And our immune system can do it in 3 days. So its response, it's customized to each virus, bacteria, fungus, parasite, toxin that it encounters. So my question when I first started learning about the immune system was how? How does it do this? Because in the brain, we have, we obviously have neurons that can synapse to each other and create different patterns. But the immune system is not built that way. The immune system is spread throughout the body. So every single cell in the body that has a nucleus has to be able to talk to each other through the immune system. So I want to talk a little bit about how the body decides exactly which response to give to each invader, and how we can help balance that response to either raise it up to take away an invader, or to lower it to take away a sensitivity. So let's look at the steps that the immune system goes through to do this amazing acquired immunity. So in a way, the adaptive immune system is like, well, the entire immune system is like a military operation. You have spies and scouts that go out and look for where possible incursions could be. So these spies and scouts are called phagocytes. So they roam around and they look for something. They've got a little receptor, and they look for something that fits in that receptor. So if they find something that fits, then they realize, I found one. Now I can go eat it. I'm hungry. Which we had a pretty good military metaphor going, but I think at that point it changes into an aliens metaphor. Because the phagocytes, once they find the bad guy, They actually eat it. They consume it. And so that's what they're named after. They're named from the Greek phagein, which means to eat or desire. And also the second part of it denotes cell. So these are the cells that eat or devour. Pardon me, to eat or devour. So once they have their meal, once they've been sated, they then pull out a piece of it and go, this is a piece of the bad guy. This is what the bad guy looks like or tastes like. And so it takes this, and it's kind of like somebody running around town square and saying, "This is the bad guy," and it holds it up for all the other immune cells to see. And it does that by running into the town square, which are the lymph nodes. So depending on what kind of peptide is in this sample that the phagocyte is taken, the immune system does different things. So I've found a paper online that had just amazing information about these different responses. It's by a Taiwanese doctor trained at Johns Hopkins. So here are 4 of the responses that he talks about in his paper. So first of all, we have an intracellular response. And that one's been understood since the 1980s. They call it a Th1 response, meaning T helper cell 1, the first discovered T helper cell, the first discovered type of T helper cell. But since the 1980s, they've discovered more than just Th1 and Th2, because they discovered Th1 and Th2 in that time. So the Th2 is a humoral response, which means that the cell goes around and tells bad jokes and other knock-knock jokes. So that's 2 responses that they discovered in the 1980s. The intracellular response, which is a response where the infection is inside of the cell. And the second response is the humoral response, which is essentially to transport the offender out of the body, to get it out as quickly as it can using humoral methods, meaning using liquid. So that was all they knew about for a long time, was the intracellular and the humoral response. Either kill the cell itself or just transport the bad guy out of there. But eventually they've discovered essentially several other different types of responses. So we have an extracellular response, meaning that it can go attack things between the cells, and an antiviral response to attack viruses that haven't infected cells yet. So using these 4 responses, the immune system can then take care of just about anything that it encounters. So the immune system's response is to do exactly what we do. We'd get on our cell phones. And as soon as we're on our cell phones, we text everybody that we know that, oh my gosh, there's something weird in my life. So in the language of the immune system, these are called cytokines, the signals that go out and tell the immune system what to do. So these signals, these cytokines, are done for the most part through interleukins and other immune hormone-like signalers. So these interleukins come in lots of different types, but specifically looking at these immune responses, we have seven different immune hormones to signal 7 different responses, or to signal 6 different responses. So as soon as the phagocytes, they go to the lymph nodes, to the town square, to hold up the part of the invader that he has taken away, he begins to tell everyone about the invader.
Они начинают всем рассказывать про этого захватчика.
And so, depending on the response that is appropriate for this invader, he will send out a different mode of communication.
И в зависимости от разновидности захватчика, он будет рассылать соответствующие какие-то послания.
He would send out interleukin 12 if it's an intracellular threat. So in other words, if something has penetrated a cell and it has infected the cell, then, which means the cell has to die, then he'll send out interleukin 12 to say, let's start killing these cells. But if he needs a humoral response, if the invader just needs to be expelled, then it will send out interleukin 4. So the humoral responses, they're never fun for us. They're coughing and diarrhea and swelling, sneezing. So basically, they make us uncomfortable instead of making the pathogen uncomfortable. And it usually does it because whatever it's attacking, it's too big to attack. It just wants to get rid of it. Or because it doesn't actually know how to kill it, like some toxins. So our third response is the extracellular response. That response is done with interleukin 1 or interleukin 6. And that is to take out invaders that are not inside of cells, so they're outside of cells. Usually bacteria and fungi. So our fourth type of response is an antiviral response, and that's sent out with interleukin 10. So this is the part where you can do kinesiology very easily on these things. We can balance this response by balancing these cytokines. So we have 4 different responses, and each of these responses can be done in 2 different ways. We can do it, the body can do it in a very abrupt, powerful way, or it can do it in a more long-term, safer way. So we'll call those an acute and a chronic response. So we can have an acute intracellular response, or we could have a chronic humoral response. So altogether we have 8 in total with all of these signals. And it's 8 because 4 times 2. So I want to stop and look at the chronic response for just a minute. The chronic response is done by a hormone called TGF-beta, transforming growth factor beta. So TGF-beta is a big topic right now because, or is an important topic right now because it does create it can create a more tolerable response in the body, but it's also doing some negative things with the coronavirus. So normally, this response is created by its own kind of T helper cell called an inducible regulatory T cell. And that is a type of T helper cell to make sure that everything is protected in the body. Otherwise, the body would go around launching bombs that would destroy too many healthy cells. So the TGF-beta, it turns everything down, including antibody production. And the body begins to use IgA antibodies instead of IgG antibodies. So the IgA is centered around the mucous membranes, like the respiratory system and the digestive system. So COVID-19 is really sneaky. It makes the body overproduce TGF-beta. And so the immune system can't gather a response to do the acute response that it needs to do to get rid of COVID-19. So the body is then producing a whole bunch of TGF-beta instead of the interleukin 21 that it needs to produce to just kill it and get rid of it. And that can make the COVID-19 last a long time if the body is not able to respond properly. So for our immune balances, we need to make sure that the body is producing the correct response with the correct cytokines. And the leaders of the immune system that determine the cytokine are the T helper cells. So those T helper cells hold up our antigen that the phagocytes found. I'm sorry, the phagocytes hold up the antigen for the T helper cells, and then activate the T helper cells to become certain versions of T helper cells. So when it sends out the interleukin 12, we have either the Th1 or Th1-like T helper cells. For the interleukin 4, the humoral response, there's Th2 or Th9. For interleukin 1 and 6, the extracellular response, there's Th22 and Th17. For the antiviral response, interleukin 10, there's Th3 or other ones called Th alpha beta. And then for our acute and chronic responses, there's cells for each of those. There's T follicular helper cells for the acute response, and regulatory T helper cells.
That's in the chronic, yeah?
Yeah, and for the chronic, there's T regulatory T helper cells. Mm-hmm. So we have a different type of T helper cell for each response. So then these T helper cells, or generals of the immune system, then activate other cells to do their bidding. So we have a whole list of different types of cells that get activated. But what most people are talking about are the antibodies. And the antibodies are produced by the B cells. So B cells are named B cells because they start in the bone marrow. So when they first start out in the bone marrow, they're called naive B cells. You know, they haven't heard of all the things in the world. So those become B plasma cells, which actively send out antibodies to go paint the bad guy so that the rest of the cells know what to attack. And then there's the B memory cells that keep a record of what antibodies that we've used. So that if we need to face this invader again later, we can just pull out our record from our B memory cells. So there's a diagram of an antibody. So there are different types of antibodies. When a B cell comes out of the bone marrow, they start with two default antibodies, IgM and IgD. IgM is the major short-term response for antibodies. It gets rid of, it's used for most acute active infections. When the B cell is activated, then it'll do something called class switching, which will change its antibody to IgG or IgA or IgE. Which gives a different response. So our primary immunoglobulins are the IgM and IgD, and our secondary immunoglobulins are the other ones, the IgG, IgA, and IgE. And you can see that by percentage in the blood, there's mostly IgG. About 80% of the immunoglobulins in the blood are IgG. Actually, let's go back. So the IgA is what gets produced too much of with COVID, and that's why it affects the mucous membrane so much. So if that whole process that we talked about goes wrong, then we have allergies or sensitivities. And each type of response has its own type of mistake that it can do. So we have both chronic and acute allergies and hypersensitivities. So for instance, type 1 diabetes is an acute type 4 allergy or sensitivity. And that's from an overreaction or an overactivation of the acute intracellular response. So now we know what interleukins are involved in that, and we know that process of setting up the T helper cells that needs to be rebalanced in order to establish a healthy immune response. Another example, asthma is a chronic humoral response. So these are the papers that I used to research this talk, and they were just amazing. Though one of them happens to be a textbook that is so thick that you could probably hurt people if you threw it at them. And that's our acquired immune response. Thank you very much. Do we have time for questions? I think that's a yes. Are there any questions?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So someone's thanking you for a presentation, making it fun and accessible for a subject that's way too techie for them. So you detect it. Can you talk about systemic sclerosis? Why does immunity attack the body?
Well, why does immunity attack the body? So that process that we talked about holding up the antigen, holding up the little piece of the bad guy, that has gone wrong. Or the pathogen itself is actively disturbing the balance in the body, in the immune system's regulatory functions. So either that function of sampling, of the phagocyte sampling, the pathogen needs to be balanced, or the immune regulatory mechanisms need to be balanced. And then the body can properly recognize self from not self.
Okay.
Any more questions?
Yep. How give COVID-19 the TG beta signal of put it on? I'm just reading out what it says.
I'll answer what I think that means.
Yeah, please.
And there's a gene called SPARK, the SPARK gene, which then turns up TGF beta. And COVID artificially turns on the SPARK gene to artificially turn up the TGF beta to artificially turn down the immune system so it's not attacked so much. Any more questions?
Yeah. Have you worked with anaphylaxis?
I've worked with, I don't like having someone go into anaphylaxis in my office, so I work with it by just trying to bring it up with formats, but certainly, yeah, the allergy formats, these sensitivity formats come up very easily for that.
So you just use the allergy balancing, basically.
You actually can combine the allergy balancing with what I just talked about. What I just talked about is actually mostly from my class, infection pathways, and you use infection pathways to find the antigen presentation, and so the first half, and then the allergy balancing for the second half.
Okay.
Because the body has mistaken something for a very deadly pathogen, and so it's that antigen presentation that's gone wrong, so that needs to be balanced.
Can you explain why some people don't seem to build lasting immunity to COVID?
Yes, that's a great question. It's directly in the what we were just looking at. So the IgG antibodies tend to last for years in the body. But if you have enough TGF beta produced, it stops the production of IgG and changes it to IgA. And so then instead of having those long-term antibodies produced, you just have more short-term protective antibodies, because IgA is very protective for the mucous membranes. But the body then actually tries to compensate to turn things back up. And a lot of times what it manages to do is just overproduce IgA and actually have a cytokine storm. Any more questions?
Yep. Can we do anything to alter the immune response to COVID or activate the correct immune response?
So that's why I researched this whole paper, was what can we do to specifically shift what's going on with COVID. And certainly balancing the process of the immune response is going to be important. If the body can shift it to an acute response, it can remove it very quickly. The body can do this even without balance, without necessarily having a balance, if it has enough vitamin D, which is why some people hardly have any symptoms, because they have plenty of vitamin D. Any more questions?
What is TH alpha beta?
So TH alpha beta is both a family of T helper cells, and in this case, it's specifically a type of T helper cells made for an antiviral response, an acute antiviral response.
Have you worked with specific techniques to rebalance the T helpers?
Yes, and it's all about the antigen presentation of the phagocyte to the T helper cell. Because in that presentation process, the T helper cell activates certain genes inside of itself. And those genes tell it what its job is. Any more questions?
Yeah. Okay, here's what, this is going to be interesting. Is there an emotion connected on a virus, parasite, or bacteria?
Yes. Any more questions? Just kidding.
Yeah, there's one more.
Okay, so just to answer that, I see patterns. Like with COVID, I see a lot of fear, a lot of group fear, and the group fear tends to make a weakness in the immune system, and that COVID can take advantage of. So COVID is kind of this self-fulfilling prophecy that the more fear we have of it, the more weakness that our immune system has to it.
Okay, you ready for the lightning round?
Yes. Do I get extra points?
Yes. Oh, yeah. There's. Okay, 30 seconds for each one. You were talking about 8 responses. Can you explain it?
Yes, I can. Next question.
Last question. That was it.
Oh, okay. So yeah, we've got our 8 responses. We looked at them already on the slide, which we can go back to. And we can go back to that though for a second. And so we have an intracellular response, a humoral response, an extracellular response, an antiviral response, and each of those can be acute and chronic. The intracellular response is to kill infected cells. The humoral response is to expel an invader. The extracellular response is to attack something outside of the cell. And the antiviral response is to kill a virus. And each of those can be done in a powerful or in a conservative way. The conservative way is to protect the body. The powerful way is to get it done. Did I do it?
You did it.
Brilliant.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you, Steve. That was awesome. We've got time for a 5-minute pee break, coffee break, glass of wine break, depending what part of the world you're in. And we come back and we've got the legendary Charles next. So thank you, Steve.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Hugo. And thank you, Dennis. You did great.